July 26th is in session. We've seen a number of different agendas floating around. So if you will allow me to suggest an agenda, and then you can all agree or disagree. And this is based on the one that Phil photocopied, but item A would be the joint meeting with the Housing Authority. Item B, presentation from the meeting with the ISO office. I guess that's redundant, IS office. Item C would be waterfront discussion. Item D would be a discussion regarding Fine Arts Committee member. Item E would be power poles on the sewage treatment plant farm. Hopefully it won't take long. And item F would be scheduling the city manager candidate interviews. You all okay with that? Any objection? Then that agenda is approved as our official agenda, which brings us to our first item, which is joint meeting with the Housing Authority. Andy or Dan?
We're happy to be here. I apologize for not being at the tour on Saturday. My son turned 13. That only happens once. So, but I heard you had a good tour and saw everything we have. That's good.
We did. I think I've heard some various discussions. I mean, from my people, the tour was good. It's always good to see all of the properties. There was a few properties that I recognized, not very many. There has been discussion that I've heard from various members of the community and other governmental agencies that we coordinate with about how much low-income housing does Littleton want. And I know the Housing Authority is more than low-income housing. So I thought it would be good for us to sit down and perhaps you guys can talk about some of your future directions and projects. We've heard some rumblings about some property up in District 2 around Huron. We know that there's 4 duplexes. You mentioned it, Dan, on the tour, right south of Sherrilyn Nursing Home, that there's some plans for. So why don't we start off with you guys walking us through what your plans are for the next, say, 5 years or so. I read the document that came from the retreat, but I guess I'm looking for something a little more specific.
Well, just to kind of start them off a little bit, we've talked a lot about, I think really for the last 5 or 7 years, we've talked about being more self-sufficient. And I think part of that deals with the Housing Authority being involved in things that probably aren't as traditional as you think of as housing authorities, maybe more developments of bigger pieces or different projects like that. And one of the things, and I just kind of, we've been talking about maybe we need to change our name. And so I just thought I'd try this out for you because I just kind of came up with maybe our new name should be Shaft to Coal. And, just it kind of rolls off the tongue. And, for Super Housing Authority for the awesome city of Littleton. So I thought, maybe that would be one way that we would start. But one of the things that we've been talking about is that the Housing Authority, through things...
Great on the side, by the way.
Okay. It'd have to be a really big sign. But one of the things that the Housing Authority can provide, and we think that where we haven't been utilized enough, is in partnership, because we have access to a lot of different funding sources, a lot of different grant sources, a lot of different things that would make us a good partner in redevelopment of sites that obviously, well, they don't even necessarily have to have housing, but they have to have some housing component, I guess, to it. And so we talked a little bit about that at our strategic retreat, about how we can position ourselves to be that kind of partner and align ourselves with the city's needs in certain areas or developers' needs in certain areas. And, you know, some of our projects in the Northeast have kind of been that way. I mean, our focus has been, those are areas that need redevelopment or control or help, and our investment in those areas has definitely been for that reason. So that's some of our focus. One of the real exciting things that we've done, especially on our Powers Circle, is a lot of the funding that we've been able to get for energy efficiency. And I think I just got the information tonight. I mean, some of the energy efficiency items that we put in there will save us, you know, over 6 million gallons of water. A lot of the great thing about a lot of these things is that they're through grants that are free, or essentially free through us. We can get them for free. And so that's just an example of some of the things that we as a partner in these, or in a project, can bring.
Okay. Bruce?
Are we, do you want to wait, or is this just
Or
sort
did
of?
you want more specific? Yeah.
Okay. One of the things that we talked about with the realtors when we had breakfast with them a month or so ago was this issue of loans to rehab single-family homes with first-time buyers. And from your guys' standpoint, as far as this partnering, you know, expanded partnering concept, is there any traction there from your perspective that
Well, yeah.
could work?
I don't know, Dan, you could probably tell how many rehab loans we've done.
We average about 9 to 12 housing rehab loans each year, and they average about $13,000 per loan. So somewhere in the neighborhood of $130,000 to $150,000 a year that we're putting back into the community.
Say 12 to 15 a year?
9 to 12. 9 to 12. So it comes out to around 130 to 150,000 a year.
But I mean, did you see upside I mean, the conversation was more along the lines of,
Of home ownership, right?
well, yeah, but expanded capacity. So it's not necessarily quote-unquote low-income housing, but it serves the function of rehabbing the housing stock with first-time buyers that then, you know, rising tide lifts all boats kind of thing.
Yeah, we actually have done a couple of rehab loans that the people purchased the home and it needed work immediately. And so we were able to kind of slip in afterward and do some of that initial that they couldn't qualify for with the full mortgage. So,
Right.
because we're able to be pretty flexible in our mortgages.
Okay.
So, you know, that kind of enhances the first-time home buyer.
Do you guys see yourselves doing maybe more of that, or is that not necessarily high on your radar?
It's probably not as high on our radar right now
Okay.
for the home buyer.
Okay.
You know.
But one other issue of that, too, is that we used to do rehab loans that were for the health and safety of the individual. And now we're expanded that a little bit up to $25,000 to do improvements to the home, whether it's beyond health and safety. It could be additional bedroom, it could be additional bathroom, it could be something like that, beyond the health and safety of the individual homeowner.
Okay.
So we have expanded it somewhat.
Okay, good. Yeah, that's good.
Well, and one of the ways that we've partnered is that those funds that are used in that rehab program, that Littleton Housing Authority and multiple housing authorities in the metro area have kind of partnered with First Bank, and we have a $3 million cap that allows kind of additional funds for rehab for organizations like Littleton that participate in that program.
Okay.
Because it's a benefit to us as a bank to reinvest in our community, and the housing authority is a great vehicle to do that.
What if we were, just thinking out loud off the top of my head, what if we were to pick a neighborhood, or probably more likely a couple blocks, sections of a couple blocks in the neighborhood, and say, you know, we want to apply some attention to this particular area. Now, you can't obviously force people to upgrade their homes, but we could perhaps advertise that the rehab loans are available. visible, and the concept is to try and take some areas of the city that need a little more attention than other areas of the city and see if we can't get some movement on that. And most of that is related around housing, either single-family or multifamily. And you guys seem to be the appropriate vehicle, or perhaps a more appropriate vehicle than others. And part of the problem that we have visually is yards. I don't know how you attack yards, but when you drive up and down streets, part of what the visual appeal of the street is, which affects people's ideas of the neighborhoods, or what shape the yards are. And I know the yards aren't a traditional, other than you guys redoing some of the yards on your housing, which look very nice, by the way. I know the yards aren't a traditional housing authority area of expertise or concentration, but what about a program to loans or landscaping help, or help people get connected up to fixing up the yards?
We actually have done some, especially for our seniors, kind of as a reasonable accommodation type, where we put sprinkling systems in, as well as zero-scape in some cases, just for energy conservation, water conservation. I think that's a great idea, actually. We have a public service announcement on Channel 8 right now about the rehab program and what we've been doing. A lot of it that we've done in the last year is for handicap accessibility. We've done a lot of work in that area right now. And one of the things that we really want to expand this program to is to go into rental rehab. It's something we haven't done right now, but we're just on the cusp of getting that program started. It has to be single family or duplexes. But it
So
would
this would
help,
be privately owned rentals that you're rehabbing?
right, and it would help the landlords upgrade the properties. And I think that, I mean, the homeowners, that's one thing, but I think the rental property is another. So that's one of the things that we're probably going to try and get done this fall.
And I'd like to say, sorry I'm hogging so much of the conversation, I'd like to say that you all's purchase of the apartment buildings that's happened over the last, 3 years? Is a fabulous step in the right direction. Because some of those areas need a lot of help, and that is something that can be done, and it has a monumental effect not only on the building and the people living in the building, but the area around it. And so those types of things, I think, provide some dramatic turnarounds to areas of the city that need perhaps a little help because of the age or circumstances or whatever else is going on there. So please do more.
Well, there was another owner over there who owned several apartment houses. After we kind of got involved, they started upgrading theirs as well. And so I think if that leads to a domino effect, it'd be great for that area.
Well, if it leads to a domino effect, I mean, that would be fantastic. I can remember 10 or 12 years ago, I kind of pushed the council and the housing authority to do a rehab of an existing house instead of a purchase. And Jim told me it probably wasn't going to be the best expenditure of money for the bang for the buck, and he may very well have been right. But the hope was that would motivate other people on the block to do that. Obviously, for that particular house, wasn't going to be a very efficient expenditure of either the city or housing authority.
But I think historically, that's what we've seen, is we do a rehab, it snowballs in the neighborhood, and other people, they may not use a rehab program, but they also will upgrade their lawns or paint or things like that. So that's another goal of the rehab program.
And another thing that's helped that is the city's code inspection program has gone in there and has really enticed, shall we say, some homeowners to do some upgrades of their apartments that probably would not have happened if the city hadn't gotten actively involved with code enforcement as well.
Yeah, I think that program has taken a lot longer than any of us thought it was going to. It may be a program that never ends.
I'm going to just start with more general comments rather than jumping in on the specifics. And I'd say, part of one of the benefits in just looking at the information that was shared and certainly the results of the observations during the time we had to tour. What's been impressive to me is the distribution of projects across all areas of the city. And it may start off as affordable housing. You know, folks can kind of put that in low income, but at least in a number of these instances, I would say that the folks have either grown with the residences or it's had an opportunity to change for the betterment. And I have to say, from a personal perspective, I was envious of some of the views, the view corridors that are there with some of the property. Now, I also know that it's usually impossible to have 100% success on every property, every situation over time. And I know that a lot has been done in part of the city for some of the sections, certainly the code inspection there to ensure that folks that may not have a voice, were at least in there, and making sure that we can do what we can do to see that a safe environment is there from code standards that we do have, and that's pretty strong and really kind of interesting. And I know that the board as well as the staff is aware that there's some folks out there that may not fully appreciate the overall objectives because they may have that less than perfect situation that's down the street or a neighbor of theirs. What can we do is kind of my question to both try and increase the success rate, if we can contribute to some of that, but also be in a position to possibly increase folks' awareness of what is going on, and that in every instance, it could be someone who's kind of gotten into a tough spot, and this is a way for them to be a contributing citizen in that. So I'll leave that kind of question out there because there's a lot of good things that's happened, and I'm just trying to say how can we be in a position where folks kind of are a little aware. And I will say, I don't only pick on the Housing Association for this. The South Suburban also gets the same treatment because in my neighborhood, one of the big things is on Saturdays during the soccer games is the parking is a problem. So it's not a pick on, but how can we be in a position to say, hey, it's there for folks to use. Good things do happen, and how can we help to increase the success rate and also the awareness so that more folks are aware of the good, and we can kind of figure that out together and be good neighbors.
Part of the problem, I think, is that there's no big, huge pool of money that's available out there. And so if you push too hard with too much advertising, it's going to swamp the ability to do anything, and that cuts back on, I mean, it just angers people, So you got to play your cards right and be very careful.
But also, I mean, and certainly in some of the messages that we've gotten is, folks are aware of which properties are which, at least, on that early part. How do we kind of help in some of that? I'm not necessarily looking to advertise it to be available for folks, but that people in the community know what's going on, and there's no idea that's universally good for everyone. I've kind of learned that. How can we get to the point where it's seen as a positive overall? More so.
Well, that's, since $64 no longer buys very much, that's the maybe $64 million question that part of our...
You have to either use B's or T's
as you notice, one of our retreat goals was the community's perception and enhancing it. And the letter that was received by council recently is an example of the attitudes and the beliefs that are inaccurate. I think everybody is aware of the letter. And when I read it, I was absolutely shocked beyond belief. One, because I had been at the public meeting that had taken place and didn't hear the comments that were supposedly said. But I think that's just an example of the issue of how people feel about government now. And everybody treads very carefully and lightly. And if we had, at least if I had a magic wand so that I could have people look at, all aspects of what the Housing Authority has been doing and the quality of what we've done, that's a sort of tricky thing to have someone be willing to listen when their feelings are quite negative to begin with. I don't have as much of an answer. I think we're really aware of the need to put our best information foot and what we're capable of doing in terms of helping the community forward. That needs to be known constantly.
Well, you guys actually do a great job of that. And part of this, I think, is a natural, I don't want to say class warfare, but a fear that with poor you can have crimes and gangs and violence and things like this. What they don't realize is that the properties that you control, you do a better job of screening that out than many of the private properties. And so that's part of the lack of perception that's out in the public. And I think that has a tendency, combined with just this general unease of having large classes of people in a different economic class from other people living close by. And it's an unfortunate, almost part of human nature, it seems like. But if I can circle back to a comment I made at the beginning, because I fear it may be misinterpreted. I said earlier that I've heard different people express some concerns about how much more housing do we need, how much more affordable housing do we need. And I think that really needs to be put in context. And the context is if the city's already built out, or close to being built out, and you have so much lower income or lower rental properties in the northeast neighborhood anyway, how much more new units do you need to add? And I don't think that that's the same thing as taking existing units and bringing them under the wing of the Housing Authority, because you bring some very big benefits to controlling properties, and that is you screen the residents. You have some management control over the external appearance of the property and what happens in there. And we find that sometimes with private owners, that may not happen as well as what we'd all like.
Doug, I'd like to go back to something you said earlier as well. And I like what I think was your distinction between modeling revitalization versus targeting areas. And you can't force things on neighborhoods or even individuals. But I think, the Housing Authority has the whole initiative with the purchase on Power Circle was to some extent to model possibilities there. And I'm wondering how that would work and how that might be implemented on a house by house, but maybe even in an area that looked like an area where we could find those opportunities for revitalization. And I think, Bruce, what we were talking about last month was using some of the resources such as the Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac Home Path program that they're just rolling out, and to revitalize properties and get them back into responsible ownership, and the FHA rehab 203K program, which is designed to revitalize distressed properties. But I think that would be a great idea to try to pick up on, how do we identify those properties and model the revitalization and then promote those models to the marketplace. I know another area I think where we might be able to work on that is with employer-assisted housing. Working with some of the larger employers, the hospital particularly, the city itself perhaps, or the county, and working with them to come up with some human resources benefits that would benefit their employees to step up to some of these revitalization properties. Because it is kind of challenging. Everybody wants to move in right away sort of thing. They don't want to be the pioneer. But I like that distinction between modeling revitalization, whether it's house by house or neighborhood, versus targeting, areas for revitalization.
Well, targeting will end up sounding not very good.
Well, you didn't use that term, but I appreciate that.
Yeah. And one of the big advantages to the housing authority in some properties to do is not only the modeling rub-offs that happen from that. And I think, Jim, you talked about some of the private apartment owners getting confident enough to be able to invest money that the neighborhood is going to be okay. But you doing that also potentially fixes problems that you might have in that area with residents that live in there. So you're not only fixing up the building and modeling it for others, but you're also helping fix some of the other issues, the social issues that are around that property that then permeate out in the neighborhood and affect all sorts of different areas to it. So, I'm sorry for repeating myself, but housing authority purchasing apartment complex I see as being nothing but good news and good value to the city, especially in the northeast area. And whether you take that purchased property and use it exclusively for low-income rentals, or whether you rent that at market value, I still see value to the city in that happening if you're picking properties that have issues that need to be taken care of. So I don't know if that fits with the housing authority's vision of your own goals. But, I mean, there's some synergy to be had here, it seems like. And not just with money that necessarily goes to the housing authority, because when the realtors were here, they mentioned some programs, and I don't remember if they were Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac or what they were. Some private programs that also did loans for rehabilitation or renovation that were wrapped up with the mortgage to purchase the property at the same time. So it doesn't necessarily all have to be housing authority money, but having one place to coordinate that or to provide the information might be beneficial. Might help get things going. Because we're spending our community development block grants up in the northeast area. I mean, we're doing the sidewalks and the streets up in that area because that's some of the basic things that you have to do to make a neighborhood functional. So we're not targeting, we are prioritizing.
I wonder if there's an analogy between the question of how much low-income housing does Littleton need and the question how much parking does Littleton need. I mean, it's sort of that if you build it, they will come thing.
Well, and I think that's a little bit of the fear that's there is when I hear people go further down the path of expressing that concept, it's that we don't want to turn Littleton into a haven where we are the stopping point for everybody that can't afford houses anyplace else. The flip side of that is the housing authority acquiring properties and managing properties is beneficial to the city for all the reasons that we've talked. And most of the time when I make that argument, the people understand that. and recognize that. So I don't know that there is a right answer of how much low-income housing that you need. There probably isn't. I know there will always be a need for assisted living and elderly and some people that are disabled and they can't help themselves. There will always be a need that will never go away. But part of the potential friction, either rightly or wrongly, is people in neighborhoods that are in predominantly single-family or mixed single-family and multifamily units that are afraid of the housing authority coming in and changing the composition of the neighborhood from single-family to multifamily. Now, it's a two-edged sword because most of the time, if you're doing that, the single-family properties that you're going to convert are in pretty bad shape. But on the other hand, you are turning single-family properties into multifamily, which then does change the composition of the neighborhood, in some instances to the good, in some instances to the bad. But as you know, zoning to density is a very sensitive topic around the city, and has been for decades.
So I think the larger question is having an adequate mix in the city. We need to have an adequate pool of people with disposable income, significant disposable income. We don't need to have everybody that way, but we need a mix. Otherwise, we're not going to have people spending, stores are not going to stay, and we're not going to attract people because we won't have stores to attract people even from outside. So that somehow keeping an eye on balance to make sure we don't lose opportunities for the people with more disposable income. And that in my head means I think I like the idea of focusing on the rehab to help grow that portion. You know, keeping, I mean, I live in a pretty modest little house, but then there are people like me who like small house, but they wanted a nice small house. Mine's not as nice as most small houses, but still a tolerable small house. And so whether the house is small, larger, huge, whatever, trying to keep the housing stock in good condition. Then I have a question because quite a few people they talk about this, and it was in the letter that we got, but we got this in the packet, and you told us about it on the tour also, how you screen people, and if people that are living in one of the units, house, whatever, does certain kinds of things, how you respond to that. So could you tell about the multi-pronged screening?
We have a 4-step screening process right now. It includes checking criminal background, credit, past landlords, and we do a home visit on 100% of the people that come in. So we go to their home and physically look at where they're living, how their housekeeping is, the whole thing. Before they're ever admitted in. That's part of our whole screening process. After they get in, you know, sometimes things change. Sometimes there may be criminal that comes up or various other things. And that, I think, is one of the things that the Housing Authority does really well, is we will take a very active role in that. And we have resident services that will counsel. If it's criminal, it's kind of a one strike and you're out. I think one of the things that we see so often is not being able to make the distinction between low income and affordable. And there's a huge thing. Low income is for people in need that don't have the funds. Affordable can be workforce housing. It can be for teachers. It can be for entry-level city employees, that type of thing. There's a huge distinction. And I think, Doug, what you were talking about over at Power Circle, that's one of the distinctions, is making it affordable for everyone to live. But it's not just having bricks and mortar changes. You have to change the culture. And that's what we're trying to do. That's how we bring our screening in. But we're very, very responsive as far as resident services, because I think unless you find a way to show people how to do things right, they're not going to be successful. And our whole philosophy the whole time has been a hand up, not a handout. There's accountability for that. And so I think that goes hand in hand with the screening and helping them along the way.
But you should talk about the distinction between Section 8.
Yeah, we get a lot of comments about we don't want any more Section 8 housing. Section 8 is a very unique program. It is a subsidized program, but it's not government-owned. A Section 8 landlord basically signs an agreement with the housing authority to receive full rent on their unit. So as far as having a lease with the housing authority, they don't. A Section 8 person will have their own individual lease with their own individual landlord who does their own screening. The city is a Section 8 landlord because we have some Section 8 at Geneva Village, but it's privately owned. But there are a lot of other landlords within the community that have Section 8. The beauty of that program is that people aren't targeted, if you want to use that word, of being low income. They can live anywhere in the community with any type of housing that meets their needs, whereas public housing or subsidized housing is government-owned housing. So I think that's the distinction, because a lot of times people think we don't want any more Section 8 housing. We get about $2 million a year from HUD, and that all goes right back into the community to the landlords. So people do get full rent. It enables the landlord to get full rent on their property.
That came in during the Nixon administration, and the philosophy was that public housing should not be the only housing that helps people who are in need, that private landlords and maybe private business can do some things just as well. So that was developed as a result of wanting to let private businesses be a part of this piece of what? Social service, in a sense, in the community.
And each Section 8 recipient pays 30% of their income toward that rent cost too. It's not fully subsidized by the government. It's also, every person who's on Section 8 pays 30% of their income toward that rent cost.
You know, Libby, thinking of your goal from the retreat of burnishing your image, we do a 15-minute segment once every 4 times a year, right, on Channel 8. Maybe what we ought to do is devote a segment to housing authority.
We would love that.
That would be great.
Hook you up with Kelly. I know that she has somebody scheduled out in advance. And then you can tell your story and perhaps promote some of these things we want to promote. Because Channel 8 gets a surprising number of viewers.
We're all for that.
I have a question about the Section 8. So on page 7, it says rents must be reviewed for reasonableness on an annual basis. What does reasonableness mean?
What we do is we will review a unit, whether it's multifamily or single family, and make sure that the person on Section 8 doesn't pay more for that unit, the landlord doesn't pay more. So you're not being penalized. But we also look at what that should bring in a reasonable market. So the rents need to be reasonable for that market. The rents are starting to go up now because the rental market's getting much tighter.
Trying to keep the government from getting scared.
Well, yeah, we want everybody to pay the same for each unit, basically, whether it's subsidized or not.
But
Vacancy rates. There was an article in the Post
Yeah.
this morning.
You saw that,
Vacancy
yeah.
rates being down in the metro area about 4.3%, which is a pretty low level.
And Dan, isn't it also true that with all your Section 8 housing, you do an inspection on those units yearly as well?
All the units, before we approve them, we do a housing quality standards inspection, And then we do it annually thereafter to make sure that the property is being maintained. So we do that on all of our units, but with Section 8, it's some quality. So if there is a problem in the unit, then we send a letter to the landlord and give them a certain number of days to correct that.
So nobody knows which properties are Section 8, right?
Right.
So, but if somebody saw weeds or,
That's not necessarily true.
People often know what property has Section 8 and what residents have a voucher. So to say that people don't know, I don't think would be an accurate statement.
so how do you know?
But it's Peyton Place out there, man. People talk.
Oh, but apart from that, right, but I mean, you're just driving down the street, whatever, there's nothing that would let you know that. So apart from...
Not with the housing authority properties, I would say.
Yeah.
Because they do. If a person has a voucher, and you didn't mention your crime addendum in your lease, in the housing authority leases, there's a crime addendum in there that many of the private owners don't have in their leases. And that is that if they commit a crime on or near the property, they can lose their housing, let alone their voucher. The voucher is something that a lot of these folks really don't want to lose. So in a way, they will behave better than folks maybe without a voucher because they don't want to lose that voucher. But with the crime addendum that's in the lease, that helps us to enforce certain behaviors, help keep people in line. The other part about the care of the properties, can you tell if it's a housing authority property? The housing authority properties are in good shape. I think as we drove around the other day, I think that we were pretty amazed by how they are. Even the locations, like backing up the green belts and things like that, there's some good things there.
So we'll know, but because they're kept better than the others, right? I'm teasing.
Perhaps.
I'm teasing.
There's a lot of folks that take care of their house. And you all get out there and walk the neighborhoods around you and the rest of the city. And some blocks just homeowners take better care of their property than others. On the same block, you'll have one or two that just don't take the same care. And an issue is that people think that the Littleton Housing Authority it comes with a stigma that, it's those low-income people again. Well, low-income people are people, many, 80% of the mean income perhaps. They get up and go to work just like everybody else. They come home and have dinner with everybody, like everybody else. But the housing authority is up against the stigma, and as Andy had mentioned, that maybe a name change would help us. When you call yourself the housing authority, Littleton Housing Authority, it's like some government entity that just is running the show and is doing a bad job, and that's just not the case. It is something that we're up against fighting every day.
And one of the things that we do that other landlords, I don't think do, we do a weekly inspection of all of our properties. We have lease enforcement, and we write lots of notices if people aren't weeding or mowing or taking care of the property. So we're at every site every week.
What did the Lakewood Housing Authority change its name to?
Lakewood Housing Authority is now Metro West Housing Solutions. Boulder Housing Authority changed their name to Boulder Housing Partners.
Those might be better than mine, I guess.
No, I like it. Yours has a nice snap to it.
Being the District 2 council person, I've had a lot of folks talk to me through the years that we have in our district more than our share of housing for low income, etc. And of course, we had the problem up till a few years ago where we had so many migrants that were in the apartments that were up above us. But overall, I think when you talk about District 2, all of those apartments that you're rehabbing at one time were top of the line apartments. And what happened was we hadn't started subdivisions yet. That is the oldest district we have, and all of those were made after the war. And if you drive around there, you'll see a lot of nice homes and being well taken care of that have, through the years, they've done a really good job. And I really appreciate our people up there. But they do have the idea that they've just had enough of that. And they would like, if low income is going to be low income, then it's going to be dispersed housing and not all in one district. And they would like to have it spread out. District 3, 4, 1 take some of the heat off of them. I don't think that they're so upset with the fact that we're going to build this humongous building up there, which was eventually, I think it topped out at 52 units, wasn't it?
The one we looked at was 40.
Yeah, 40 units, but they just thought that was a little too much right there. And I'm quite sure that you would get some stiff opposition, depending on what you go in there with. I think a lot of them have said, well, why don't they just build 4 more of those units like they have up there? You know, that would be something probably you could live with. But, you know, you people have to work with what you got. And anyway, I'm very proud of District 2. A lot of those homes that you have, if you look at them, they're under 1,000 square feet. And a lot of the old ones, they do need a lot of help because there's old people there that have lived there forever, and nobody's stepped up to do it. So maybe this might be part of your role, is to be more active in that area where you help the people that are very, you know, and you might get some that say they don't want any assistance, but I think overall you probably would get a nice approval of some of those accommodations. And the Housing Authority, as far as I'm concerned, has done a good job. But you might find some opposition up there. So just be prepared. Perhaps.
You know, there are some attractive models of revitalized housing in District 2. I mean, I can think of a handful right off the bat, not even to mention like, you know, some of the neighborhoods that have smaller revitalized houses. But, you know, that on Forest Hill and Greenwood, Elmwood, I mean, they'll match any property in the city for revitalized housing, whether they're scrape off some rebuilds, but they represent significant private reinvestment in that. I don't think they intentionally did it in District 2, but it's happening all over.
Well, years ago they had a program that was called, I think it was before the housing authorities, Paint Up, Clean Up, Fix Up, where volunteers got together and they would talk to a homeowner, and then they would go in and do those things that they could do, paint their house. They didn't put in all the windows and stuff. They didn't have money for that, but they did do a tremendous amount of good there. And maybe, and it's probably the same thing you're going to do now, is you go to a person and fix up their home and help them out. And that's good. So
There's actually various volunteer programs that still exist that run around in Littleton and other areas of the metro area that make available people to come in to fix up the exterior and the interior of houses for people that need help in getting that done for their home. So it's not the same name, but it's the same function.
yeah.
Well, I was just trying to bring this all down to what our focus should be. Obviously, District 2, but revitalizing that. I mean, I don't think we can change District 2, the housing that's there. I mean, the amount of that kind of housing kind of stays that kind of housing there.
I think you're correct. If you've got 2,000 units in District 2 that rent for, or that are 600 square feet, just to pick a number, and the Housing Authority comes in and purchases 1,000 of those, it doesn't change the fact that you still have 2,000 units that are 600 square feet. It doesn't increase the amount of low-income housing or housing that rents for low levels. If you come in and tear down single-family homes and then put in multifamily homes, then that does increase. But coming in for the housing authority to come in and purchase existing housing that's already built, that already rents at a certain level or is already sized at a certain level, is really nothing but a benefit to the city because of the way that you all manage the properties and who goes in there, screens the people that goes in there. And I think that may be one of the misperceptions that people get tripped up on is just because the property is owned by the housing authority doesn't necessarily change the composition of the neighborhood. In fact, it probably does change the composition of the neighborhood, but in a positive way, because it was already there. The Northeast neighborhood's already built. Most of that stuff, is going to stay there for a while. It's just a question of who owns it, how does it get rehabbed, and who lives in it.
But you're also saying that you don't believe that we need any more low-income housing within the city.
No, you mean new units?
Yes.
I've heard concern about adding more new low-income units. And I'm not going to say that 0 is the right number of new additional units. But I guess I'm aware of the atmosphere in the Northeast neighborhood in District 2 that if you were to go in and buy single-family homes and tear it down, the perception is going to be that you are adding new units and it's concentrating in an area where people are already sensitive to that.
But if it's not in District, I just want to get aligned with what you guys are thinking, because that's, I think, where we got in trouble in District 2, is we thought the vision was the same and it wasn't. And we need to be aligned with that, because we say low-income housing, but that very well could be a nurse working at the hospital. That very well could be, a whole wide range of workforce, essential people within the city of Littleton that just happen to be entry-level people that aren't making a lot of money.
Bruce? And I don't mean to get off your question.
No, I guess I was sort of going to try to play off of what you're talking about. One of the things that I've heard on more than one occasion as well, and maybe the phrase isn't low income, but the concept of sort of a fixed income type of patio home. There's been more than one comment made by people, more of a senior demographic, who want to stay in Littleton but haven't had the type of housing stock that would facilitate that tends to reside more in Highlands Ranch. It would seem like some sort of a niche that has this sort of a patio home, small footprint. I don't know if a Section 8 kind of thing is quite that answer. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't know all the specifics, but it strikes me that type of a concept is a bit of a step away from quote-unquote low income, and maybe in District 2 that would play well within the city broadly, because I think there's demand. But I don't know how that fits with what you guys view as opportunities. I mean, it could be a sort of a pure developer kind of, private development kind of thing. But then, as you suggested, there's a lot of, or somebody suggested, maybe Andy suggested, there's a lot of access to partnering and funding, and this has certainly come up in conversation on more than one occasion.
And that's one of the things that we try and do, is kind of think outside the box and see what product isn't here. And staff especially has talked about baby boomer housing. I mean, the seniors coming up now do not want a one-bedroom subsidized apartment. They want more. They need more. They need a larger unit. So a patio home, or even perhaps an apartment, but 2-bedroom, or even 3-bedroom in some cases. 2 bathrooms, it's a whole different thing. That you can't do with subsidized housing. That's why you have to get tax credits involved. and do a whole different thing, and that's not low income. So that's, I think, the difference. We, I think, have a lot of low-income housing for seniors. We don't have near enough because we have long waiting lists. But I think for that niche, we've got some really good units right now. But I agree with you 100%. I think the seniors coming up now, it's going to be a different ballgame.
But I think you're looking for a specific answer to a direction question. And if I understand the question is do we view your role as a developer of what we characterize as workforce housing, housing that's targeted at people at the lower income ranges, but not so low that they would need subsidy or assistance living there? And I guess my answer would be no, I don't see that as your role. I don't know what the rest of you think.
I'll go out on a limb a little bit on this one, which is, the aspect of, if you want to say, revitalization or rehab, with some respect for private property owners and what they're doing, that lifts the value of the overall stock. And from a community perspective, I see that as a great thing. Being in a position to deal with some aspects of your housing so that there's a screening that occurs, lifts the stock, the overall property value. If there's an area, and this probably would dovetail a little bit with some of Bruce's thoughts, which is, to the extent it can be put somewhere in the mix, dealing with accessible housing that can occur as possibly some of that rehab part, if that can fit within your charter and your mix of what you're doing, I would see that as positive. And I will tell you, because I deal in this space all the time from my own professional perspective, trying to figure out what aging boomers are going to be like. Okay, I can find a debate that's going to talk about just about nearly every element on the spectrum. So getting back to our 64 at the number of zeros question, that's the one that's kind of tough. But what we do know is that there's a lot of folks in Littleton that love to be in Littleton that, from at least the perspective that I have, would love to be in a position to age in Littleton, and that's the part that's going to put the challenge on our overall community. And to the extent that we can rehab, revitalize with some of that, not taking away from your basic charter of dealing with the aspects of the mix between low income and affordable, that's going to be there. Now, at some level, I would say I'm probably not looking for the workforce housing near as much, unless you find an employer partner or employer partners on that. If Littleton Hospital, or as we look at our healthcare quadrant of the city, says, hey, we're looking at this, and that's something, but that's not something I would put on your doorstep.
I wonder if maybe, Andy, I don't want to
Oh, no, go ahead.
preempt the guy. I think 2007, 2008, Arapahoe Douglas County did a housing needs assessment. And it was based on a broad outreach. They did surveys of housing needs. And the interesting thing that came back on that, in terms of, they saw affordability as, of course, about dollars, how much of people's income they spend on housing, but they saw the critical needs for housing that was convenient to jobs, whether that was through transit or just commuting, housing that would, and in that sense would avoid congestion and long commutes to work, a housing that was, that had good schools, that had convenient to shopping, that sort of thing. It was interesting, and they do this, they can think that maybe our goal is to try to address some of those needs that they identified in terms of the sorts of housing that we provide and through the rehab programs that we rehabilitate so that people can continue to access. But it was interesting how many of those needs were the sorts of things that Littleton as a community actually does provide or offers, I'll say. It was an interesting, that was an interesting outcome of that study. The needs, it wasn't just about price or square footage. It was about lifestyle.
Well, I was thinking of a distinction that may be lost. I thought what you guys were talking about when you were talking about workforce housing and acting as a developer is new construction and vacant property. If what you're talking about is purchasing existing properties and transforming those properties into workforce type housing, which is something like what you did with some of those apartments on Powers, that's a different story. If you're talking about buying vacant property, or perhaps starting urban renewal by buying multiple single-family houses and trying to turn those into workforce houses, that gets into a different area for me. And frankly, that's going to come with all sorts of political stickers on it. So I see that as different than rehabbing existing houses. And I think that was a distinction that Phil was making too.
Yeah, and we've tried that. We've not, correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, been incredibly successful in that. I mean, the 3 or 4 that we've done, but Auburn would be a good example. That I think we would say is a success.
Well, it's part of the reason why you guys do it is because it is difficult to do. The private sector does the easy stuff and they do the profitable stuff. And so that's part of my concern is if you start doing the stuff that the private sector would do on its own anyway, then we're kind of losing the value of having you. The reason why you exist, part of the reason why you exist, is to do the job that can't get done any other way. You're the guys that go in and do purchase and rehab the houses when private industry won't do that for whatever reason. You're the ones that build the assisted living because it needs to happen and nobody else is stepping up to do that. For you to take on the role that the private industry could do and probably would do, and to do that yourself.
But to take that just a little step further, because I think in a lot of those cases where private, if it's multiple units or whatever, that's where I think we might be that tipping piece to make it worthwhile for a profit-driven company to do that, to partner with us.
Well, and I recognize that there's trade-offs on any kind of property like that. If you're buying 2 or 3 houses that are run down, that have been run down for years, that are going to stay that way for a long period of time, and you're going to transform those into multifamily units, then the trade-off is the neighborhood has to look at, and we, if the city, has to look at, well, you're going to have the resistance of going from single-family to multifamily, but on the other hand, you're going to get rid of eyesore single-family that probably wouldn't change on its own for a long time and get something better. And, I don't know that you can ever say in advance what your decision is going to be all the time on all those properties.
One of the things I think are going to make a great difference in the near future will be the addition of auxiliary units to a home. And this would be, a lot of folks don't want to move, but they're in too big of a home. So they would be allowed to build a small house in behind the regular big house there, where their family could come and live in the big house, and they would pay rent to the senior citizen that's moved in back that only needs maybe 800 to 900 feet square unit. They don't need much, it's pretty much, but a lot of them like to have a small garden and those kind of amenities that you wouldn't get in an apartment structure. And I think they're coming down the line. Arvada, I think, has approved auxiliary units in behind the big homes. And I see us doing that one of these days. I think when I get older, I'd like to stay in my place where I'm at. Matter of fact, I got that small barn behind our house. It was actually constructed for a mother-in-law house at one time. That's why we thought we had to bring Phyllis's parents out of the mountains. And that's why I started into that years ago. But fortunately, I have a little rental that's 640 feet. It's one on the corner of Huron and Powers. And that's where we placed them. They had a little garden. They had things that they wanted. They're not being in a nursing home. A lot of people say, well, if you're going to put me in a nursing home, bring me a 45. I'll take care of this right now, because they really don't want to be there. So I think that'll be a new concept that's coming down the line.
Peggy?
Yeah, so some of what you showed us on the tour with what you're doing with some of your existing properties doesn't, at least for some of it, doesn't get quite up to the word rehab, but you're doing some improvements. And I could see that you could do that on some existing houses if you acquire those, and not just cosmetic, but bring them up, improve them the same kind of way. That's what I'd really like to see. And I don't know if can you change your mission statement? One word? Well,
What
it
words
says,
do you want changed?
it says Littleton Housing Authority seeks to strengthen our community by creating opportunities for diverse housing alternatives. I think you might ensure rather than create. That the creating, I think, maybe invites the thought that all you do is new stuff, whether it's single or multi. But the ensuring allows that without requiring that, and allows the rehab piece, I think, which you already are doing.
Yep.
One of the things that I was most impressed with on the tour were the homes that you pointed out that you guys had rehabbed, and the current occupant actually owned the home. And they had, some of them were the original, some of them had sold and moved over. I think that is, that's the kind of thing I'd like to see more of. I think a lot of the homes that you have might be starter homes, and they're smaller homes, and maybe someone does start in there on a renting situation, but then can move into more of a home ownership. That changes a lot in a neighborhood, and that changes a lot in the psychology of people who may think they can never have that American dream. And to have someone who can assist with that. I mean, I got my first home off of the mayor's first home buyer loan program, which is still out there. It's not as aggressive as it had been, but that, as you said earlier, Dan, that hand up. I'm now in my third home, and so that was an economic assistance for a lot of folks. I'd like to see that kind of thing happen a little bit more, and I don't know if there may be special loans that have to happen and all kinds of other things that may not be as easy as build it sell it, own it. But I think that's a positive step for what you guys do too. And that's a super positive message to send too, is that, no, we help people out of, you know, the renting into the ownership and sell, buy something bigger, move on, someone else gets to do that right behind you.
Jim?
I want to ask you a question based on something you said, Marco, about where you thought we might need to go. We've got a waiting list for senior housing, and in order to make senior housing probably work for us, it's going to have to be newly built. It's going to have to be on some piece of vacant land now. It's probably going to be multi-story. The only way we can make it probably financially feasible to build housing for seniors. Do you have a reaction to that?
Shudder. No, I mean, I recognize that senior housing needs to be built. You know, if that's what the economics are, that's what the economics are. We all around the table know what that's going to be as a public hearing process. So choose carefully where you plan to put it.
Well, we have nothing in mind right now, but I think that as the population ages, I agree with Joe, an awful lot of people want to stay in their homes. They want accessory dwelling units added so they can be able to do that. But then there are others who says, you know, I'm ready to move into something I don't have to take care of at all. And that's a senior housing project of some sort. And we're the ideal group to do that.
Yeah, there's going to be a bump in the population that's going to be around my age. That gets to the point where we're no longer physically capable of taking care of our properties like we used to, and we're either going to need assistance taking care of our single-family homes that we raised our families in, or need to go to someplace else. And hopefully it's not quite to the level of needing to go to a nursing home, or even perhaps to assisted living, although that may be a path that we end up taking. I mean, the need's there, obviously.
I've been going around visiting senior centers just because of personal interest, not from the Housing Authority's point of view, but I've been investigating Windcrest and what's happening with the New Verona and Heritage and Oakhurst. I mean, there are just a long list. And I was also taking note of the number of Littleton residents that were moving out of homes here and going into those out of need, you know, as you're just describing, Doug.
Yeah.
And we always, I remember a couple of years ago, we had some kind of community meeting. We were looking at what are seniors going to need. And we were talking about the patio home idea and the desire we all have to remain somewhat independent. It's a big challenge, and obviously the private market is picking up on some, but Verona's gone into sort of a holding pattern.
And Windcrest had a bankruptcy, at least on portion.
Right. And he's had the same challenge. But
Places like Windcrest are fabulously expensive, too.
And the others are even more expensive.
Libby, are you familiar with Windsor Gardens, what happened over there?
No, I just know people who live there.
Because there was something in the neighborhood of bankruptcy or something like that there too.
Where was that?
Windsor Gardens.
Where's that?
It's off of like,
Southeast Denver.
yeah, it's like across the street from where Lowry is now.
It's been there for a long time. And the values there have held up pretty well.
It was bad news. I just don't recall exactly what it was. That's why I
But
thought you
it's
might.
fairly old, so the need for upgrading and updating that would be...
Yeah, and they may not have had the money to do that now.
Maybe you all could pick up that property on Broadway immediately south of the Highline Canal at Arapahoe.
That's not in the city.
The one on the west side.
Yeah, it's on the
Okay,
west
on the west side, yeah.
The one where
Okay,
they were
yeah.
going to do for.
just north of the park.
Yeah.
It keeps getting zoned for assisted living.
It's-
They can't quite figure
It's
out.
been zoned for, I believe it's been purchased by somebody else and nothing's happened on that.
It's probably zoned for dentistry, so if a resident gets out of control, we can yank some teeth out.
They might not have
Full
any to
service.
begin with.
But there are a lot of small properties in Littleton. Like you mentioned in 2, but also in 4 and 1, particularly near the Stern Park neighborhood. And you showed us, I think, some properties that have been made accessible for people. And maybe the thought is not to put lots of everybody's into a big unit, but to make more properties accessible and then have encourage private or partnership kinds of things to do the maintenance things. And if they are, like we're trying to do as many things with our house as we can to make it last and not need certain kinds of repairs, unless we get, I better not say this, but major hailstorm, the roof should last twice as long as I've got left. The different things that we're doing to reduce the maintenance piece. And so that seems to me a kind of option.
But Windcrest, I mean, if you go back to Windcrest, and I assume the other ones that are like that,
And the others are more expensive than Windcrest.
and Windcrest is actually aimed at a economic group that's actually fairly well off
Right.
when they get to that age, because you have to be able to purchase into that and to be able to afford the services that they provide. So, I mean, are you looking at something aimed at that economic group? Or are you looking for that type of service for a different economic group?
Yeah, Our discussions about Windcrest are occasional, but they usually revolve around the interesting fact that Windcrest's entire marketing program is all about the benefits of living in the city of Littleton. And it's the Platte River Greenway, it's the parks, it's the trails, it's the museum. It's amazing to me, and that's their marketing program.
Well, their entrances.
Well, one of the things that I thought when, and we've heard this quite a bit through media and stuff like that, is that a lot of people, I mean, at least this is the story the apartment builders are telling us, is that they're seeing a lot of the seniors moving out of their homes and into apartments simply because of the lack of maintenance. They don't want to do the maintenance in the yard. And a lot of these apartment buildings are providing so much more of a kind of a concierge type of life.
Yeah.
And we've got 2 places like that right now. Alexon is 300-something plus, and then they're building Alta Aspen Grove, which is touting itself to be, you essentially don't even have to leave your apartment. Everything will come to you. And it's close to light rail, and it's close to shopping and all that. So, I mean, it's not, they're not touting them as low income, but for a lot of the seniors, they have a income, or not an income, but they have money. They're just not spending it on the things that we spend it on. So that's apparently a very viable market for those apartment builders. That's exactly what they're honing in on.
One of the things that we had talked about several years ago, actually, was kind of what you had mentioned, Debbie, was trying to entice, so to speak, people out of their homes, because a lot of seniors are cash poor, but they have an asset that would really turn around for them if they had another viable option. And I think those that you mentioned are coming in. So what we had thought, especially as a staff, is to be able to tap into that and somehow find the funding to purchase the homes from the people, rehab them if necessary, and then either lease to
Bring in
open
new.
to buy, but let the seniors turn their home over to a young family, turn the neighborhoods around so we're getting more kids in the neighborhood, and they still have the sense that it's their home and they know who they're going,
And then
who's
they
going
are,
into their home.
the seniors sell the home to that?
Right.
Yeah, that's
And
great.
then it also allows them to have more spendable income,
Mhm.
because all their money isn't tied up in an asset that they can't maintain.
Mhm.
So, but there again,
If
it
you
takes
can
a
help
lot
on
of
some of the
money.
economics for that, that concept of sale lease back kind of approaches would be one of those things that's great. My guidance in talking with a lot of folks that I talk with is you may get some of the general trends kind of right, but when you're dealing with specific properties, don't try and tell anyone what to do. You're going to have the go-go period, you're going to have the slow-go period, you're going to have the no-grow period. And I guess my cautionary term would be respectfully nimble, because we don't know where it's going to go, but and where folks are going to be, because it's going to be a combination of all the different things we've talked about, and what happens with individuals and how they go through their own journey is going to be one of those things that everyone's journey is going to be absolutely different. Nobody's going to look exactly average, and so the nice thing is it's a local program. What you do is here. It's in Littleton, and that opportunity to be respectfully nimble is your understanding of our neighborhoods and some of the issues that are here is what really makes this special. So,
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that you were reminding me of telling my children that this was really a good thing, and I really believed it. And my children saw it very differently. So sometimes you think you're saying and doing the very rightest thing, and somebody else just doesn't see it that way.
Yeah, and what you think is right for them, they may have a very different, because they have a different value that they place on different components of their life than what we do on the outside looking in. Let me say thank you very much for meeting with us. In my memory, in 10 years on council, I think this is the first time the council's actually met with the housing authority. Can you say it another time?
I think we did.
We did meet with them.
Yeah.
Once before? Okay, that's great. And I think it's beneficial us getting together. Thank you for setting up the tour for us and taking us on the tour and spending your hour and a half with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for the meeting.
And I want to say again, I want to reiterate that I think you guys do a great job. We are proud of the Housing Authority and pleased at the work of the Housing Authority also. Thank you. Thank you for your time. And let's take a 5-minute break or so.
Thank you, good mayor. We had a meeting with ISO representatives, that being Doug Welch was the senior field agent, and David Avera was manager, regional manager. They're both connected with ISO, the Community Hazard Mitigation Service. As you know, ISO is a private, for-profit company that provides information to insurance carriers concerning risk evaluation. We met, when I say me, I actually mean that council was well represented with Debbie Brinkman and Bruce Stallman. Also there was our assistant city manager, Phil Cortez, and our very talented and esteemed legal department. Suzanne Strait was there. So we sat down with these two representatives and asked them questions concerning why now. As was pointed out before, it seems this Trailmark subdivision has been in existence for quite some time. They were in existence when we did the ISO reevaluation in 2001. Actually, the two representatives conceded that point and didn't seem to give a clear explanation as to why we are now a 3/9 and then in 2001 rated a 3. Other than say that they are updating periodically information that comes to them concerning locations of stations and the community that those stations serve. And their update seemed to indicate that the community of Trailmark is outside the 5 miles, thus a 3/9. I thought we were pretty pointed in our questions concerning the 5 mile limit, 5 road miles.
Is it 5 road miles rather than?
5 road miles. We offered several alternatives to the 5 road miles, and those were turned down. They go by evidently some fairly strict rules, and the number 5 seems to be one of those rules. Didn't matter that the 5 road miles were highway miles or residential. Didn't matter what kind of traffic control was between the station and the resident that they were being served. They continued to hang their hat on 5 road miles, and that was the difference between a 3, 4, 5, 6, and a 9. And if you're outside that 5 road miles, it seemed apparent that at least these two representatives felt that that was sufficient to award Wilton Fire Rescue a 9 rather than the 3.
So they can count to 5.
And they did several times for us. Is that correct?
That's correct.
We asked them about the effective date, that being September 1st. And we've asked if they would reconsider and move that back to January of 2012 to give us enough time to evaluate our situation and look for other alternatives. I think they indicated they would consider that and would get back to us. They were also asked to provide a written statement concerning an appeals process. And they agreed that their legal would be talking to our legal concerning if there's an appeal process available.
They say what kind of station it had to be?
Fire station. Actually, they were pretty, they said it had to house a fire engine that would be staffed by 4, that would be available 24/7, 365.
First alarm.
Thank you. And the first alarm also. And the reason that became important to this discussion is we were talking about mutual aid that we do have currently with West Metro. They insisted it needed to be automatic aid that that the first arriving or the first alarm had to be transmitted to that closest station, and that closest station needed to be responding. Versus mutual aid, where we asked permission from a field commander over in West Metro, and then they would release the resource to us.
So they require a station that has a truck that has 4 bodies on the truck.
That has a unit, yeah, a firefighting unit that's staffed with 4.
When would they be getting back to us about the extension?
Well, the indication that I received, I think was pretty soon, that, in fact, they were going to make the calls tomorrow to follow up on the information that we asked for.
So your impression at the conclusion of the meeting was they were holding out great hope that the legal appeal process would be effective in.
No, actually, they indicated there was no appeal process, and that's what we asked for in writing, that we wanted them to articulate that there was nowhere to appeal, there was no remedy for us, and that we had, by meeting with them, essentially exhausted any remedies that we had.
Suzanne, you might want to talk about how they talked about the state legislature.
I mean, we talked briefly. It looks like the only avenue for change, and we indicated this in the meeting, would be to go to the state legislature and ask for legislation regarding what kind of rating versus miles, or to essentially create the standards for how ISO would be allowed to rate. That would be apparently what has been done in some other states, because when I showed them some examples of other jurisdictions that claim to have lower ISO ratings, even though they had fire stations outside the 5 miles, one of them indicated that that may be one of the states where it's legislated that way.
They placed a lot of emphasis on their state insurance filings. They weren't clear how frequently or how those filings could be amended easily, given any potential issues we brought up. They didn't know when they'd filed the last, set of state commission rules or filings, but they referred to those frequently as being essentially what determines how they have to do what they have to do.
Now, one of the things I have an understanding is that, yes, ISO does filings, and that some carriers kind of follow their pro formas in what they do, but there's also, I won't say vast, but I will say a fair number of carriers that may provide only limited credibility or may not even use their ratings at all. What were some of their responses and the volume of folks here in Colorado that are in or out?
We asked them, essentially what you're saying is correct. They're a subscription service, so insurance carriers can utilize, they can subscribe, get the information, use it as they see fit. They acknowledge that there are insurance carriers that don't use their service. Others use multiple services, including them. We asked to get a list of maybe who the carriers are that use their service, and they weren't necessarily enthusiastic about providing that. I think we might be able to procure it possibly through the state, but we weren't entirely sure.
Yeah, I think the insurance commissioner may have that information, and since the insurance commissioner's office is a public office, we could request it from them, and then we are also following up with trying to talk to a broker about where would be maybe a more suitable.
So just the point I've tried to help folks realize is that the appeal isn't necessarily to get ISO to change. The appeal can be to either folks that use them as a subscription service to either limit their credibility, particularly in this instance, or work with the carriers that don't utilize their service, because there are the potential for other rational minds, and they're formulaic in their approach, which means they're very rigid. that's what folks get with their subscription service, and that's why there are more than a few carriers that provide limited credibility to that.
Yeah, I think that's extremely insightful, and frankly, I think rigidity was sort of the sensation we walked away with.
Okay, well, thank you all for the encouraging, uplifting ISO.
There you go.
Great feedback. It certainly was unexpected. That brings us next to the water fund discussion. Debbie?
Well, I guess I'm just, I want to just make it as clear as possible on the water fund. I've had a number of citizens comment and ask questions. The issue also came up at a meeting with Trailmark recently. I've also talked to a couple other council members, and I don't know that there's consensus among all of us and staff. And as we head on into the September budget period, I thought staff's always asking for clear direction on these things, and I would like some clear direction also. My understanding of the water fund was always that money, we had discussed the police facility, and we had discussed paying off some debt, and we had discussed rainy day fund, and at one point we had that all pocketed and was going to, put it in those bunches. And then we pulled back a bit from that because there seemed to be maybe paying off some of that debt wasn't something we wanted to do. Maybe carrying it was maybe a better idea, and back and forth. So in looking, I asked Doug Farman to pull up where we were with it, and I think I sent that all to council. I think I left mine at home. But some of it has been spent on the lease agreements with the radio, and we've spent some on maintenance, we've spent some on the courthouse, because it went into the special projects fund. So we've got, based on the...
Hey, Deb. Marvin has an updated sheet that might be real helpful to you.
Okay.
Why don't you have him pass that out?
Oh, thanks.
We talked about this, and I just wanted a clear accounting, straight accounting of how the money's been spent today on what. The policy question, however you guys want to slice it, is whether or not you want to use the money to pay down the lease payments. And that's all on this. So we're not trying to, we're just presenting you the information, how we spent the money, what's left, and the question now is, are you all together?
Well, and I guess that's part of my concern, is that I felt as though the payment of there was a vote on the police facility to move that money and to pay for that out of the water fund. And what I'm most afraid of is that one day we look down and there's no money left in there, and what did we do with that? And I understand that if we don't make some of these payments out from somewhere, then it has to come from somewhere else, and where does it come from? So I don't have, council needs to make that decision collectively on that, but I feel as though we had made a promise to the community and to the citizens when we were going through that whole thing, that was in some ways going to be earmarked and judiciously spent. Some may think this is the right way to do it. I don't know. I just didn't feel as though this was something, and that we had all agreed to do. And then I get memory problems all the time, but an email or a memo that had come to us from Jim Woods on October 7th, 2010, which talked about the special projects. And it really did detail the intention with this and what to do with it. So I guess I just look at it now. We've got budget time coming up. Do we feel like do we want to let the 13 or the 1.3 million go like into these payments, or do we want to give them different direction as they're putting together the budget, that we don't want it spent out of there anymore? Do we want, what do we want? And that's basically why I thought it would just bring it up. And
I think to tag on to that, Debbie, is it came up in our budget discussion last year, at least from my perspective. So my recollection, of course, can be it's memory on this, is that we kind of raised it up to say, hey, we want a specific accounting on the water fund. We want to be conscious of what's happening. Our sense collectively is we feel a specific accountability to what's happening in the water fund, and wanted to see that. At some point in time during some of the discussions in 2010, it wasn't necessarily heard, but at that point in time we elevated it, and I think collectively said, hey, we want a tracking of this, and we want to be conscious of it for the same reasons you've talked about, which is if you have a chunk of change that's sitting in the cookie jar and it's right by the door that everyone's leaving out of, it's apt to kind of deplete over time without any consciousness in that occurring. And at least my recollection was we wanted to be conscious of this one. So, yes.
Bruce?
I think the same, we had sort of a similar conversation with the Denver water contract payment about at least getting that into a separate account line item, right? Wasn't that when we did the Denver water contract, we got the 2.1 million, the direction was to put that in a separate line item so we could keep track of it.
That's correct.
That's happened.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of think, my recollection was I kind of thought these two were the same kinds of animals in that regard.
Yeah, they'll be tracked in the special projects fund, but we will track those separately.
So we can keep
kind of like a sub fund.
Yeah.
Within that special projects fund.
Okay.
And we can do whatever type of accounting that the council deems fit here. We can do it the same type of a way that we provided in the budget book on page 134 with the water funds. We did like a reconciliation of the water funds. We can do that the same way with the Denver water money.
Well, I guess, yeah, I would think that, I don't have the book, but I would think that would be.
that was the one I emailed you guys.
Okay, so you've probably seen it, but. Yeah. And then we also do a separate account number for the line item projects to keep them separate from the rest of the special projects.
Okay. I would think this would be, I'd like to see that for the Denver water.
Does council feel like what Doug handed out tonight is a good accounting of how the money is being spent?
Yeah, I'm confused by a couple line items, but as a general format, I think it's okay. So at the end of 2011, we'll have almost 4.3 million bucks left from the original, whatever that amount was, waterfront. 11, almost 12 million bucks.
That's right. Our estimate for the police facility right now is about $5.4 million, and that's what's built into this model here. So depending on what the actual costs come in at when that's completed, when all the costs are finally paid out, then right around $4.3 million.
Okay.
And I think we just did some quick math. If you just paid the 1.3, if you paid the lease payments, that's about 3 years lease payments, if that's how you want the money spent. And that's all in the special projects fund, and it's all above board, and it's right there.
Well, I guess the other side of that coin is, do we collectively want to make those payments using that money? Or alternately, in theory, we could take general fund money and replenish the water fund with the assumption that the lease payments are ongoing obligations as opposed to quote-unquote special projects, and then make that part of essentially what's being paid out of the general fund.
Well, when we first discussed the water fund, Debbie talked about this. We basically came up with two types of expenditures. One was $6 million for a police building, and then the remaining portion was to pay off those debt payments or debt-like payments that we could pay off without a penalty. And I believe that was the three things here, correct? We then, as time went on, the economy crashed, and I think we all collectively got concerned about holding on to our cash because we didn't know how long the economic downturn would be. My preference would be when we get into the budget process, which is, August or September?
It's early September.
Okay, that we sit down and relook at what we think the economic future is going to be, look at the viability of paying off those three loans. If the council decides that they don't want to pay off the loans for whatever reasons, economic outlook, forecasts, other things, we then at that point decide if we want to spend the money on capital projects or making the equivalent lease payments, which is the direction looks like that we did in 2011. But to me, that's a decision that you make at the budget process. And maybe 2 months from now, we'll have a better idea of what's going to happen economically in the country, although I'm beginning to think that's not likely.
Are there any lease payments due between now and the budget review?
I don't believe so. We had a payment recently in June.
They come out of this?
But probably at the end of the year. I don't have the actual dates that we make those payments, but.
Did the June payment come out of this?
Yes, it would have come out of the 1.381. And since the council agreed to refinance the courthouse lease certificates, that payment would be a little bit smaller for 2011.
And frankly, after refinancing the courthouse lease, it may not make sense to pay off the courthouse. If we just get done refinancing the courthouse, I'm not sure the smartest thing in the world is to then pay it off immediately after refinancing.
Right.
But to me, that all seems like decisions that you'd make at budget time. I do think that the council was concerned that we keep track of what the expenditures of the water fund are. That appears to be going. Are you all right with all that, Deb?
Well, I just don't want a budget time for staff to have, spent $4.2 million or somewhere between, $1 million and $4.2 million out of the water fund on other things, and then the water fund's gone. I would like to see staff try to bring us a budget without going into the special projects fund. We've got some unexpected expenses looming, i.e. street lights and different things like that perhaps, we want to talk about rainy day fund. This may be a better place for that. But I just don't want to balance the budget on the back of the water fund. I don't think that's what we told the citizens we intended to do.
I don't want to do that either, but if we leave all this money in the special projects fund, which it's in, we go through every single one of those special projects on a project-by-project basis. It's really at that time where we would decide if that project was worthy to be spending money on and where that money needed to come from. Because we've got a limited revenue stream in the special projects. It's HUTF and building use tax, and that's about it, if I remember right. So the only other place the money gets into there is transfers from the general fund or other funds. So when we look at the special projects fund in the budget process, it'll really be up to us on what special projects we want to do and how much of this money we consume to do whatever special projects we think are appropriate at that time. But I think I share your sentiments, and I think that that's what all the council had, is that they were looking to be able to give an accounting to the citizens of what we spent the water fund on, because that money was collected for a specific purpose, and that purpose went away. And we're now using it for a purpose different than what the original purpose is, which made us all uncomfortable, but the alternatives were worse than that. And so I think we all want to be very careful on what we spend the money on and make sure that we can stand up in front of the citizens and say, we realize we collected this for impending water projects, but those water projects don't exist anymore. We have a different contract, we have a different situation, and this is what we spent the money on, and for them to be able to say, yes, I recognize that that's an appropriate expenditure of the money.
I want to make sure I understand. What I think I heard was Debbie's thinking, if I'm right, Debbie's to hold off spending any of this money right now, just sock it away.
For 2012.
For 2012. Yeah, but are there other projects that we should bring forward that this money could be used for? Or, because there's the difference between saying, I don't want to use it for lease payments, but I want to use it for, make what you said, like street light replacement or something else. I mean, should we bring back a list of other ideas that this money could be used for? Because if we just sock it away...
I would say you have to, because otherwise it doesn't get spent. And it's pretty clear we're not going to pay off the courthouse lease, no matter how we think the economy's doing, because we just refinanced the courthouse lease. So it makes no sense to collect the citizens' money and keep it in the bank and not spend it.
Okay. I just want to make sure I was hearing that you're saying,
but
bring us back a list how this money might be spent differently than what we have been doing. Okay.
And be careful, as we know that you always are.
Yeah.
Jim?
Well, I think there's a couple of projects that I would like for us to put on our radar screen that may be a possible use for this water fund money. I hate, like Debbie, to keep spending it on lease payments, because the original plan was lease payments was going to come out of our general fund, and the economy is dictated otherwise, and would like to see what we're taking out be paid back. I think we need to look at eventually having to do a new fire training center, and that would be an appropriate use, in my mind, of using this water fund for helping do a new fire training center. And eventually, long term, I'd like to see this fire station connected to this building located someplace else, because trying to get fire trucks through Main Street in rush hour traffic and across Santa Fe to keep going on Bowles is practically impossible to do. And I think there's other locations that we can put this fire station and then utilize the space here for things that we need it for as well. So that's that's long term. I think it needs to be out there.
Bruce?
I guess Doug's got the memo, I think, that you were talking about, and frankly, I think I vaguely recall we did talk about using the money for debt service, but I sort of agree. To me, the debt service, I mean, it's a zero-sum game. We've got to come up with the money somewhere. At the same point in time, to me, the water fund almost needed to be, in terms of special projects, I guess I'm having a hard time sort of reconciling in my own mind that the lease payments constitute special project as opposed to an ongoing obligation, and that things like the street light replacement, so forth and so on, is a little bit more of what was intended with this chunk of money, acknowledging that it's sort of it ended up being fungible. I guess I might take the approach and see if we maybe don't replenish the whole thing and transfer it back out of the general fund and then sort of see if we run this stuff to the general fund, what does that actually look like, as opposed to, then if we want to make a transfer, we do it overtly?
Well,
You want to do that during the budget process?
no, I admire the goal. I'm just not sure that there's going to be the money,
In the general fund?
yeah, to have the flexibility to do that. But as you said, money is fungible.
Right.
And if it turns out that using water fund to make lease payments is a difficult story to explain to the citizens, but using the water fund to replace streetlights or do something else, then maybe that's the right thing to do. But as you said, money is fungible. If it's coming out of the special projects fund and you're spending X amount out of the special projects fund, that revenue has to come from someplace. So if we're not spending on lease payments, but we are spending it on something else, then that frees up the money that you would have spent on something else to then make the lease payments. But that makes a cleaner story for being able to track the money and to stand up in front of the citizens and say, this is what you paid in and this is what we're spending the money out.
And I think that's the issue.
I think that is the issue too, and I think that's what we really need to wait until we get to the budget process. At least that's my recommendation, to see what our needs are. I realize we do a 5-year capital plan, but that has a tendency to shift. See what those needs are, see what you're proposing needs to be done, absolutely needs to be done in 2012. What the revenues are that we have in the special projects, and then what the reserve is that we have in the special projects, and this is part of, or perhaps all of the reserve in the special projects.
Yeah, anything that we have now in special projects, with how this funding was, like you just said, Bruce, it's then going to come from the general fund. When is our next review of the revenues with council, Doug?
August 16th.
August 16th. So we'll have another session with council on how our revenues compared to expenditures are going. So again, you'll get a better look. What I'm thinking in deference to Jim Taylor, when he talked about a couple of new things, location of this, those are things we haven't scoped out and we're not sure. We'll put them on the list of possibilities of how the money could be spent. But I was thinking more in a sense of looking at either things that weren't on our radar screen a year ago, like streetlights. I mean, that wasn't there before. So look at, like you said, what are some of the things that are coming down the pike that we know of now that we'll kind of do a wish list, put a price with that, and then you guys can say, okay, spend the money on these things because it's a good storyline and it makes sense and it's life, safety, and the pursuit of happiness, whatever. And just so we're all clear, though, that then the 1.38 thing comes out of the general fund, which would help us give some direction to departments at some point that we may have to come back and cut.
Well, we haven't said that.
I know you haven't, but I'm thinking it's kind of like with the furlough thing. Yeah. The more I know in advance, the better.
I mean, if there isn't the money in the special projects fund to make the lease payments, then there's going to have to be a transfer from someplace.
That's what I'm saying. Right now, there isn't.
Projects to make lease payments, so.
There's no other revenue source to make these.
No, the real pressure is coming from the economy because of the building use tax has dropped off so much. I mean, it used to be $800,000 to $1 million a year, and now that's cut in half to about $400,000 to $500,000. So the Special Projects Fund really needs another funding source, and if you want to look at the big picture in the long term, those debt payments, those financial obligations really need a funding source, whether it's a general fund or another source of revenue. It really needs that ongoing source of funding.
Well, so what you're saying in English is we may find ourselves at the 2012 budget where we have no choice but to make the debt payments from the revenue that we have in the special projects, and that is from the water fund. And if that is the situation, that is the situation.
But on the other hand, we can eventually plan to pay it back into the so-called water fund for other unanticipated projects
We
that
could,
is more defensible.
or we could make the case to the citizens that this isn't what our intention was either, but nobody planned on having a recession. So, I mean, our plan when we first started this was we were going to make the debt payments. What stopped us was we ran into a recession and our concern about what was the most prudent use of the money. And I think all the citizens recognize that there is a recession. Didn't have the recession, we would be spending money on different things than if we are in a recession. But once again, that's kind of a...
Yeah, I think we can put together a list of other things that the money might give you something to shoot at. I guess in an ideal world, it'd be nice if we were going to use this money for anything, would be something that we would get a return on our investment. Just as an example, last year we spent, it could be energy efficiency, it could be what we did last year on the training module, the training thing that John has, that we know that we're going to reduce some of the overtime when we budget it that way. I mean, ideally, that could be one idea of how you would use this money, and we'll put that list together.
Well, I don't remember a whole bunch of projects in the Special Projects Fund for 2011.
Well, let's also talk about that. This money's been parked in the Special Projects Fund, okay? So we're talking about using this money for either a project, the way I'm interpreting this is any project that's already in the Special Projects Fund or any other project that could be put into the Special Projects Fund, like moving the station house and doing things like that. But there may be, I don't know, I can't really think of anything off the top of my head, but I'm only thinking of construction projects and things that would go in there. I'm not thinking of salary benefits, any of that kind of stuff. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, I thought, construction type projects where am I at least narrowing the view to that?
Well, but if what we're finding ourselves in 2012, and I don't want to bring on us a preview of the budget any earlier than we have to, but if we find ourselves in 2012 not doing any special projects other than our normal street repaving, which you have to do out of HUTF, or rather, you have to spend HUTF on. If all we're doing is street maintenance and a minimal cement replacement project and lease payments, then it doesn't matter how fungible it is, there's nothing else to fund it to. So, part of this depends on what our economic situation is going to be in 2020.
If you're looking for a message, Phil, it's we want to have a clear accounting that we can communicate with regard to expenditures that are coming from the water fund monies.
And we would prefer that to be tangible if it can be.
Okay, and that's what I need, is the tangible part.
And it's got to be one of those things where certainly thoughts around what can be done that's going to create future savings are a whole lot better than if we're looking at an expenditure that doesn't have future savings.
Okay.
But reality may overwhelm that. But you know what our preference.
If we can start in that vein, that gives us some direction to put together a list, and then again, as we go through the process, if something else pops up, then we'll talk about that. But at least we can put a list.
Well, and Doug, reality may not overwhelm that. Reality may show that we can make those lease payments out of the general fund, and we don't need to use the special projects fund. I don't think it should be the first place to dip into.
It may turn out that we have enough money in I don't know.
We don't know, and
we don't know.
It just needs to be called out.
Yeah, and just so I'm clear, I just want to be up against the 12th hour and rushing around creating a list. We'll create a list, and you guys decide whether you like it or want to use it or not use it, or you want to save the money. But I'd rather be walking into a process with, here's at least some ideas of how you might want to use this money other than for lease payment. And if you say no, then...
Well, and I don't even know that it's that important to create a list. I mean, this money isn't going to rot in there if we leave it there another year. If we don't have to spend it,
I mean, it's not burning a hole in my pocket. I just don't want it to trickle away. So if there are projects that need to be done, that have some sort of timeliness to them, that there's the benefit far out reaches the, what's that the word? The cost, then that's an easier decision to make. But I don't know that I would go looking under rocks for projects right now.
No, we've got a couple of...
I mean, having money in a fund is fine.
Well, again, just like you said, with the streetlight program. I mean, if that's something I'd put on the list right away, there might be...
That doesn't mean, I mean, if there's another way to pay for that, then...
Yeah, obviously, we'll continue. We're not going to just... Yeah, I got you. Yeah, if there's another way, another strategy, we'll talk about that, too.
Okay. First?
Maybe sort of to close the loop on that. I mean, I agree with you that if there's opportunities to use it as investment money where we get a return, where we cut costs elsewhere, we make a smart investment that has a payback, of 18 months or whatever. That's interesting, and it's to me it's very attractive. I guess the ultimate question would be if we did, and I absolutely understand the issue of we may want to just do it because we have to do it on the lease payments. But by the same token, if we decided collectively that we wanted to limit it to capital projects and force the general fund to absorb the lease payments, then I guess what the implication for that would be is how do you stay balanced with revenue given the projections? So some thought in terms of what would theoretically have to be absorbed or cut probably is a good exercise if that is a conversation we decide to have.
Bottom line to that is, we're going to, at least my expectation is somewhere in the budget process, we're going to have some discussions of sliding and moving, so we're actually making decisions rather than numbers we like versus numbers we don't like.
I got that from you, I know.
Okay.
I know that.
Okay.
I have a question for him.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
Jose.
For the people out there in television land who don't quite understand what we're talking about, the lease payments that we now are making out of this water fund, this year we made $123,410 to the radio, lease of the radios?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And for the courthouse, $240,000, and that was for the payment on the courthouse?
The courthouse lease, yes. That
Courthouse.
was for the improvements done to the courthouse.
Improvements, okay. Now the ladder truck, that's $93,960. Does that go on forever?
That one will be paid off in 2014.
Okay.
And the
it's
police
only a third.
radios will be paid off in 2015.
And the ladder truck's only 1/3 of that, 93,000.
15 on the radios and 2014 on the ladder truck. So that leaves us owing at that time would be the certificates of participation that includes $923,790 for, that would be the museum, amongst that, museum.
Right, the museum and the fleet facility, I think those were the two main projects.
Fire Station 12?
There were some other improvements to citywide facilities.
But the fleet actually comes out of the fleet fund, I think.
That's true.
So this is probably just the museum, possibly.
It shows on this
possibly
memo,
conversation.
of October 7, 2010, Museum, Fire Station 12, and Fleet Maintenance Center. $975,000, so unless something
so
changed
No,
from
that's
this
right.
memo.
That's right.
Okay.
That was just 3 different areas that we were paying on. On the museum certificate of participation, that also funded the fleet and it funded the firehouse that time.
That's right. And since Mr. Woods' memo, we were able to charge the fleet maintenance portion
Okay.
to that fleet fund, the fleet maintenance fund. So we've carved that portion out. That's why the $975,000 from Mr. Wood's memo in October is less now. It's $923,790 for those other two facilities.
Okay, I just wanted to know, have everybody understand what we're talking about here. We're throwing numbers around, and most of the time, they're probably falling asleep because they don't know what we're talking about. But that leaves us with a estimated ending fund balance of $4,297,780.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay, that's the one we're talking about, and the one we don't want to just see flitter away. So what Doug was saying, if we need it, we just have to be, as a council, say, we got to use it, and we can. It's there.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks,
Next item is fine arts.
Went back to
And as previously, I'm recusing myself from the discussion.
Get out of here.
Hey,
But I'm not leaving until then.
Explain why.
I'm not really sure why he does it.
Take it off.
He could have waited, I guess, a minute.
His,
Yeah.
his wife is one of the three, right?
Well,
Yeah, three.
for background purposes, the issue is this. We've had a request from the chair of the Fine Arts Committee, as per their bylaws, to replace a member who has had 3 consecutive unexcused absences.
Okay.
The thinking between he and I and my communication to council in this regard was that we just several weeks ago got done interviewing 5 individuals, selected 2 to fill 2 vacancies. We had 3 left and believe we communicated to them that if other vacancies occur, we'd go back and reconsider. One of whom was Councilmember Cernanic's spouse.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought we were simply making the decision on whether we were going to replace that one fine arts. I didn't realize we were going to select the.
I didn't either.
Well, I think that was the question for council was how do we want to proceed with this? Do we want to just select one of the 3 remainders?
We agreed to do that.
Right. I think
thought
that's,
at our last meeting, I thought that's what we agreed to do.
well, I think we agreed we'd hold the resumes and communicate to them that we'd keep them on file for 12 months or until the next.
But I thought at our last meeting, when we put this on the agenda here, that we agreed that we would, since we had 3 candidates that we interviewed, we would pick one of them.
This actually, I think, came up after the last meeting.
Well,
Okay.
on the email, when we put
Okay,
it on
that's-
the, when we
Well,
put it on the agenda.
I guess I misread the email because I didn't realize that we were actually going to. I don't have a problem with selecting
Okay.
somebody to replace that existing person on the fine arts from the remaining candidates. I just didn't realize we were going to do that tonight.
Okay. We don't have to do it tonight. I was going to recommend we do it tonight because there didn't seem to be much point in delaying.
Bruce, I would almost suggest that we have Wendy contact each of those that did not get appointed and see if they're still interested. And if so, then if she could then disperse their application again to us and have a little time to think about it, refresh our memories, and then do this next time.
That would be great, and then do it next. I'm okay with doing it next Tuesday if we're in that big a hurry.
Yeah, this was more informational, and again, the thinking was if it was fresh enough and we wanted to proceed, great, and if we want to do that, I have no issue with that.
Okay.
And if I'd read my email,
Huh?
and if I had read my email, we could have done this.
Yeah.
Jim?
Bruce, I guess I want to know, you stated it was 3 unexcused absences in a row. What constitutes an unexcused absence? Is there failure to call in saying they're not going to be there?
Correct. No communication, no attendance.
Because hasn't she been a good member of the committee prior to this time?
She has been a participatory member of the committee prior to this time. What I can tell you, I guess, is that based on this issue coming up, the chair, and the committee reached out to her after the last meeting to try to make contact, and what I understood was there was a representation that there had been travel involved, but not communicating appeared to be symptomatic of, potentially some other concerns. So the chair recommended replacement, so I'm communicating that accordingly.
So this one is the first time we've had a chair, the second time we've had a chair recommend replacement specifically because of absences, which is different than what's happened in the past.
And the last time we didn't do a replacement either.
Well, we haven't, last time we didn't do a replacement, and the previous times, we've raised the issues about the attendance, but the chairs haven't. And I think what we did a couple of years ago is we decided we would have the staff persons on the boards keep attendance, bring that to the attention of the chairmen. The chairmen would then, if they saw an issue that they thought needed to have our attention, would bring it to our attention. So that's apparently what's happening. Was his email attached to your email? I believe
it was, yeah. Yeah, I think pretty sure I forwarded his email.
I'm thinking I read that.
Yeah.
I'm still a little confused. We just did this appointment a few weeks ago, several weeks ago. We did ask each of those people, would they be willing for us to keep their names in case something came up? So I'm not, if this were 6 months ago, maybe we'd want to contact them, but it seems to me that we have the information.
Well, are you angling to make the decision tonight, or are you arguing against Wendy contacting them?
I'm suggesting, not angling, I'm suggesting that we go ahead and do this tonight.
Well, I'm going to vote against that if you make it a motion, because I don't even have the names in front of me. I didn't come with that because, once again, I didn't realize that we're doing that. And I would appreciate sharing your notes, but that's not the same. Now, I don't think there's any harm in Wendy contacting them. Just, I would feel embarrassed if we appointed somebody and they had made the decision for whatever reason between the time we interviewed them and next week, if we choose to appoint somebody, that they're no longer open to the appointment. So I don't see any problem with Wendy contacting.
I'll make a motion that we ask Wendy to contact the members of the community that applied for Fine Arts Committee, see if they're still interested, provide council the applications for those that are still interested prior to next week's meeting, at which point we'll make a decision on filling the position on Fine Arts from the remaining candidates who are still interested.
Okay? It's been moved and seconded to do what Debbie said. Don't make me repeat it.
Or me.
And so for clarification, we're doing that at a regular meeting so we can go ahead and officially appoint them.
Yes, so you could get it all done in one shot.
So we'd still be doing that next week anyway, the official appointing next
If we
week.
follow past procedure, yes.
Okay.
Further discussion? All in favor, raise your hands. It's unanimous, which in this case is 6-0. All right. Somebody go get Phil, please. All right, that brings us to item E, which is power poles on farmland. I got a call from Jim Woodward, the mayor of Inglewood, and he indicated that he and possibly some other council people are very hot on doing the extended payments. Let me back up. You all may remember that we had an issue brought before us about British Petroleum wanting to put power poles across across the farm property that we own in conjunction with Englewood out in eastern Colorado that's used for spreading the biomass from the sewer plant. What we were presented was an alternative of taking payments for the privilege of putting the poles up as a lump sum payment up front, or taking those as a series of annualized payments for an extended period of time. We voted to take it as a lump sum payment up front. Jim Woodward has called me because he and apparently some other council people in Englewood look like they would prefer to do it on annualized payments. I told him that my perception was that the council liked the upfront payment obviously better, but I wasn't sure that they were going to fall on their swords about the issue. And I told him I would poll you all tonight to let Englewood know. So if you're agreeable to taking the payments in annual payments, then I'd call him tomorrow. Englewood has their second reading on Monday. Then we would probably have to come back and amend the contract that we approved, because we already approved the contract with them all up front.
In your discussions with Jim, did they offer their analysis on the installments somehow being worth more to Englewood rather than the upfront? We did go through an analysis.
He gave a number of reasons on why he thought that that was a better decision to make. I pointed out some risk factors. He wasn't so hot on the risk factors, but my perception is it's fairly close one way or the other. We thought that the upfront payment was better, but if Englewood has strong feelings, it might be better, in my view, to go with the annualized payments rather than the upfront payment.
Well,
In the interest of part.
I can understand strong feelings, but it's also to make a decision without at least some analysis.
He did not give me a detailed version of his analysis.
I agree. Oops, I'm sorry.
Yep.
And maybe, would it be possible to receive our portion of the payments in one lump sum and then to receive their portion of the payments in annualized?
I don't think so, because I think the property, is it owned by each of us individually, or is it owned by the sewer plant?
I think it's owned by the sewer plant.
I'm thinking it's owned by the sewer plant. So we were actually voting as owners of the sewer plant, so it'd be pretty hard to do it that way.
Pay us the whole thing and then we pay them annually?
I'll let Mr. Net Present Value.
This is why I'm in math. I'm in math whiz.
I have an HP 12C and I'm not afraid to use it.
I got it.
There you go. I haven't rerun the numbers when we did it the first time. I'm going to suggest that we felt the present value of the upfront payments was economically more attractive. On the other hand, given we're partners with Englewood, if they have strong feelings, I didn't ever get the impression we were talking about enough money to necessarily make it a hill worth dying on if they really want to do the other.
We have other hills.
Well, what
That's
if we
fine.
have strong feelings? Does that mean then they should agree with us?
Maybe on the UV issue, but
Well, I mean, unless somebody's got some analysis to show that spreading it out is a better way to go. I have strong feelings to get it up front.
Well, his analysis was that in his version of the story, the payments go forever if you take annual payments. If you take an upfront payment, it is a lump sum. So the risk is, will they still be in business and will they still be paying you in the number of years that it takes for you to recoup the money that you would get up front? And then if you're Bruce, you would run through a value of how much money are you getting up front and what's the value of that money versus if you're getting the money spread out. So Jim's viewpoint was, hey, those poles will be there for 50 years. If we kept getting payments for 50 years, they would swamp the value that we get as a lump sum payment.
I thought it was a 20-year contract.
I think it's 20 years. But this is,
it didn't.
Yeah, this is kind of akin to the story where the guy who developed Guinness in Ireland has a 9,000-year lease with the Irish government, okay, for about 5,000 acres, which is no small chunk of acreage in Ireland. And for that, they're paying £30 a year. So, eventually at some point in time when you're paying forever, you realize that the nominal value of the dollars that you might be receiving starts to exceed the administrative cost for processing.
Okay, so a yes and no response. I'll have to go to Pitt first, Jim. Are you willing to reconsider the contract? Something other than a lump sum?
Now, are you going to say with some kind of analysis attached?
Well, we have the analysis attached.
No.
Okay?
Yes.
No.
Now I'm going to have to write this down.
Yes.
Bill? It's 18 grand.
I mean, in the total context, it's not large enough. I mean, in the sense of goodwill, I will, but it's with reservation.
Jim?
They should have.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
You can't give a yes or
That was good.
Listen, looks like
There's no button here that says just yes or no.
All right. Thank you all. Moving on. Last issue.
Oh, this is
And just when you let Jim know about this, that he's on the hook for all of our breakfast fees going forward, for as long as the payment stream is going to last.
I'm just going to tell him that this is not straight for UV.
Yeah, it's quid pro quo.
Yeah. All right, item F is city manager interview schedule. What we need to get done probably is, if council wants, is a community greet of the candidates, the finalists. We need to have council interview the finalists. And I believe we were planning for the department heads, approximately 11, to also interview the candidates. If we have 5 candidates, I'm anticipating it will take us all day to interview 5 candidates. And it will take the department heads all day on the same day to interview those 5 candidates. I anticipate that the next day we will then need to hear from the department heads what their impressions are from their interview. And if this runs like it did 11 years or so ago, then we will probably want to call back 1 or 2 or 3 candidates for a second round of interviews. So I see the interview process taking 2 days. If we're lucky, on the second day, we can select a candidate, and if we're really lucky, we can get that candidate's approval. So I believe that we're going to need to have 2 full days set aside, and they probably should be consecutive days for us to interview and for the department heads to interview and to meet with the department heads. Plus, we probably want to have a social community greet of the finalists. And I'm guessing we want to have that before we start the interviews rather than afterwards.
What difference does it make?
Pardon?
What difference does that make?
Well, I don't know that you want to have the candidates get together and compare interview questions if you're partway through the interview process, but maybe it doesn't matter.
But you said you're doing interviews all in one day.
You are, but you're potentially calling some back for more interviews. If out of the 5 candidates, there's 2 that look really good, then you call them back. If there's only 1 that shines, then it may be a real simple process on the second day. And maybe I'm misreading it. Maybe it doesn't matter when we have the community greet. I was just making the assumption that the sequence would probably be community greet, then the interview process, and then the meeting with the department heads, and then possibly a recall for some subset of the finalists for more interviews.
How much time are you thinking per interview?
I would be surprised if it's less than 2 hours.
Well, me too. So if you've got, that's 10 hours, and that's not even with rest stops and lunch.
It's going to be a long day.
Sounds to me more like it ought to be 2 days,
Well,
at least a day and a half.
Well, maybe if we don't think we can get that done, the alternative is to have 4 candidates or 3 finalists.
Honestly, I don't think it would be fair to the candidates to try to do all 5 in one day. I mean, when we did the interviews for the community development director, that took most of the day, and that was 3. And by the last one, you just get a little brain dead, and it's been a long, hard day. You've been asking a lot of questions, and then you talk about it afterwards. So that we would not be fresh. We would be stale. We'd be tired.
3 days then.
Well, I think a day and a half, where you get 3 in on one day, and then the next day you do 2. I think that would be
Would there be
good.
a cutoff if, let's just say, if we have 4 candidates, it's X amount of days. If you have 5 or whatever number, there might be a...
I think you could do 3 in one day, and 2 in the next. And I think you could do 2 and 2.
Right.
I think 4 is, 3's the max. And if you're saying it's a 2-hour interview, that's 6 hours, plus time in between. I mean...
Okay. I bow to your logic. Okay. The question becomes, since you have made this 2 days at least, or 2.5
Day and a half.
Since you made this a day and a half, which 2 days is that day and a half spread across, or are that day and a half?
August 32nd.
I think, Bruce, you said you are unavailable on the 26th.
Yeah, I can't do the 26th.
Okay. We could do it, or could we, on the 24th and 25th?
The only possible conflict would be that Mercer may have an evening meeting with another facility that they are working with, but during the day they would be available on the 24th.
So we would have to conclude by 5? You think that would work? Okay.
Start at 7.
I think that's agreeable to me.
So say again.
Wasn't there somebody else who had a conflict on the 25th?
Well, we had the mayor's night at the cannery, so we have to scrap that.
I can't hear you, Peggy, I'm
We
sorry.
would have,
The mayor's night at the cannery. Or we could possibly bug out and do that, depending on how tired we are.
What time do you have to leave to do that?
It's in Kansas, so we have to leave about noon.
Well, because I'm thinking if we have, it just depends on how many candidates we have. Because if we have 4, then you guys would have time to go to that, and Mercer would have time to do their evening thing.
Well, it'll all depend. My guess is we'll have to cancel it because I think we probably want to, once we select a candidate, we want to formulate an offer then there may be some negotiations that go on. I don't think you really want to interrupt this process that goes on. And that may be the danger in doing the 24th and 25th, is if this gets prolonged into the 26th, is we lose Bruce.
We have real problems with the 25th.
Do you?
I got 3 meetings already scheduled that day, one of which I've already paid to attend.
Okay.
We can't do part of it on a Sunday?
I think that'd be pretty tough to do. The next weekend is Labor Day weekend.
No? Oh, you mean
Would-
a whole week later, yeah?
Yeah, what is, do we have anything scheduled for the 30th?
Yep, that's the marketing presentation.
When is that?
It's at 7.
31st and the 1st.
I think we can do that. The problem you're going to have is it's not just the 7 of us, but if we have the 11 department heads and you start getting into Labor Day weekend, it's going to be very difficult to
What
get
about-
all of these people.
What
That's
about the
Wednesday and
23rd,
Thursday.
24th?
Pardon?
What's Wednesday and Thursday? When's the
Well-
weekend start?
Well, if people are combining vacation with the Labor Day weekend, then it could start on Wednesday or Thursday.
What about the
We don't know
23rd,
that.
24th?
You can find that
We
out.
have council that night, but it's not a heavy duty.
What are you suggesting?
23rd, 24th?
Well, I'm thinking, what about the 29th, 30th, and 31st?
The 29th?
I'm not in town. on
I'm
the
sorry,
29th.
even though we have sorry, you're out of town when?
On the 29th and the 30th.
So that week's out.
I mean, you can, the 31st and the 1st would be okay from my perspective.
Okay, what about interviews on the 23rd and the 24th with a possible spillover to the 25th?
That's a Tuesday, Wednesday.
Yeah, I don't know what we have scheduled for the 23rd.
I think the 23rd is district.
Yes, that's my district.
But you could we, I mean, if the interviews were during the day, I mean, we
If the
could-
interviews are during the day, then we could do the,
because-
yeah, and if we're going to schedule candidates across 2 days, then we could do 2 on the 23rd and 3 on the 24th, for instance.
What time are your meetings on the 25th?
Let's say again?
You said you had meetings on the 25th in case of a spillover. What time of day?
My first one is 9 o'clock. I had to leave by 8 o'clock to get there. My second one is at 3 o'clock. And my fourth one is at 4:30. My third one is 4:30.
We're skipping the task force in August, right?
Yeah. I think we work to get it in the 2 days. I mean, we've got 3 in one day, 2 in the next, or 2 and 2, you know.
We may have only 3 candidates when we get through the next week.
Yeah,
Well, we could do the 23rd, 22nd, and 23rd, which is Monday and Tuesday. And then you would be having the community greet partway through the interview process.
I'm not.
Any opinions on that?
I'm not in town on the 22nd. I already shared these with Eric, so.
why don't we just do the 23rd and 24th? Anybody have any problems with that? 23rd and 24th?
It's a good time for me.
Okay, let's do those.
And
And we'll
meet-
get it done. We'll get it done.
And meet and greet would be on the 24th?
Does Phil have to
Or
do
the
meet and
23rd?
greet?
I don't know. I don't know when you.
Well, what if we do the meet and greet on the 22nd?
22nd.
Phil?
What was it? Excuse me?
Would you
We can
be-
have the meet and greet without you being. I mean, it's really designed for the community.
I mean, the part of the community is here for the citizen forum, so
This is 22nd.
on the 22nd. Oh,
22nd.
Perfect.
All right.
That way candidates can come in
got it.
and enjoy the weekend in Littleton.
So
and then
what time
Okay.
meet and
if they are
greet?
coming from out of state. Why not?
Meet and greet 4 to 6 or 5 to 7?
Let's let Kelly set that up in
Okay.
case,
And,
if you don't mind.
and then what time on the 23rd?
start for 8, but we may change that when we pick the number of finalists, or look at the finalists.
Also, Doug, on that, we had the community development director, when they weren't being interviewed, they were touring. So perhaps we could figure a schedule in there too.
Eric worked that in.
Yeah.
They could do it either Monday, or if the ones we interview on Tuesday could tour on Wednesday and vice versa.
I think that'd be good, but my guess is what will happen is when they aren't interviewing with us, they'll be interviewing with the department heads.
Okay, well, whatever you need to do to
But when
put
they
it in
get
a
done
tour.
with that, then they can perhaps go out on tours.
But I would hope we'd let them know about Western Welcome Week, and maybe some of them would want to come. I know they have to put themselves up for part of this, for the parade. Get a little flavor of
Well, and the parade is on the 20th, so.
Well, we'll talk about airfares and what you guys want to pay for, but my thought has always been, and Eric and I talked briefly, is just you want to book either Saturday or Sunday coming in, so yes, you don't want to pay for them coming in on Friday and then put them up for Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. You want to get them in and get them out. I mean, that's part of the consideration that you guys are going to have to go through. How much do you want to pay for it?
Now, the question came up of, do we want to pay the 5 spouses? So, make the motion that we want to pay the fly spouses.
Pay the what?
Fly spouses. Jim is seconding the motion.
Yes.
Okay, this is the area where I have a question. Okay, is it expected, and I recall from the original schedule is we would have a set of candidates and then there would be a final interview set?
This is the finalists. So we are picking a city manager from the set that we were interviewing on the 23rd and 24th.
So this is the only time that they're flying in?
Yes.
So we screen on the 8th, or whenever that Monday is.
Okay.
Yes, in your packets that will go out on the 4th of August, Mercer is planning to provide us with resumes and CVs and compile a list of leading candidates for you to review on the 8th. And so on the 8th, you would narrow your candidates down to who you'd like to meet.
And then that's why we're potentially calling them in for a second interview, but they are going to be here at one time. So, other discussions?
Now, the 8th is a Monday, and just point that out, it's not a normal Tuesday night meeting.
But the motion that we have on the floor, and we'll get to the 8th in a second, is pay for spouses.
So the anticipation is that there is up to 5 candidates, so there'd be flights for 10 folks.
Yes.
And nights for 3 nights each, is that what we're looking at?
I think you'd have to do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday at least.
Yeah, that's what I was looking at, on 3 nights. 3 nights.
Non-local.
Assuming they're all non-local.
And at this point in time, Eric, how many candidates are in the pool?
When I last checked with Mercer, they had 40.
40?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, the Essex House isn't that much.
Bemis fixed it up.
I'll just make a comment about bringing spouses in. I think our objective is to try to have some city managers going to spend a number of years with us. And if the spouse, male or female, is unhappy, you're not going to get somebody here for a long period of time. And so having that spouse come to see what the city is like, particularly if they're out of state or from out state, either one, I think is very important. They need to have, they will have an influence over the candidate. And I think that we need to make that as positive as we can.
Plus, we're requiring them to reside within the city limits.
And when they do the tours, the spouses ought to be included in the tours.
my original comments was not to fly the spouses, and that was my thought because at least my experience in going through interview processes is that there would be a decision and then the final visit. So if indeed the plan is this is the final visit, I agree with Jim and that we do want, if they have a spouse or partner, that indeed that decision is made on their team.
Okay. Any other discussion? Deb?
I heartily disagree. I don't think it's our responsibility to fly a spouse in. I think if a spouse wants to come, we're flying in a candidate, and that candidate is more than welcome to bring his spouse. It doesn't cost extra to have a hotel room with 2 people in it. I think it's fine to include them on the tour, fine to include them in the meet and greet. They're more than welcome. But I don't think that, I'm not hiring a spouse. I'm not interviewing a spouse. If we have 5 candidates and God knows where we may be flying them in from, this could be a hefty bill, and you take that times 2. And I just don't think that we're in a position to do that. We've got citizens running around Tuesday night, have a national night out without the police. You know, we've got neighborhoods where the kids are waiting for the police to show up, and we've had to make some tough cuts. And I don't profess to think that everybody is going to fall in love with Littleton, and regardless if they've seen it or not. But if it's that important to them, then fly them in. They can fly themselves in. That is the way I have seen it done most frequently, particularly when you get into tough budgetary times.
Okay. Further discussion? All in favor of paying for the spouse, raise your hands. Opposed? So it's 5-2 with Jose and Deb voting no. All right.
Okay. I move that City Council convene an exec session pursuant to CRS Section 24-6-402, Parent 4, subsection F, for a personnel matter. And I need a second.
I'll second. Okay, Bruce seconded.
I said, wait a second.
No, and
It's too later.
I know.
Discussion? Takes 5 votes. All in favor of going to executive session, raise your hands. It's unanimous.
And Suzanne Steyert, who will have Phil and
No.
Eric.
Larry.
Good Lord. Okay,
Larry
we
Lee.
will have HR Director Ron Savage, Katie Miller, attorney, and Larry Lee, an attorney,
Yes.
and
take
all city council members.
Oh, we've got a vote.
This executive session constitutes a privileged attorney-client communication. The city attorney has recommended that no further record be kept of this exec session.
Okay. And we will not be reconvening. We will not take any official action when we reconvene after the executive session. So let's take a 7-minute break.